The day my mother-in-law tried to erase me, I handed her a pen. That's not a metaphor. 11 days after my husband's funeral, she walked into my house, looked around like she was inspecting property she already owned, and told me she wanted everything. The house. The firm. The accounts. Every dollar he had ever touched. And then she said she didn't want my daughter. I remember nodding. Calm. Polite. Almost grateful. Because in that exact moment, she made the biggest mistake of her life. People think revenge looks loud. Screaming. Courtrooms. Explosions. Mine looked like paperwork. If you've ever been treated like you were small, replaceable, easy to push aside, stay with me. This story is for the ones who learn to think before they strike. Before we start, I want to ask you something real. Have you ever been underestimated in a way that changed you? Tell me yes or no in the comments. I read them. I care. And if you believe silence can be stronger than shouting, subscribe. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about money. It's about giving someone exactly what they asked for, and watching them realize too late what it actually cost. Before everything collapsed, my life was quiet in a way that felt earned. My name is Elena Whitmore, and at 31, I thought I had finally stepped into stability. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud. I was the woman behind the desk, the one organizing files, remembering deadlines, catching small mistakes before they became disasters. I had worked as a legal secretary for years before marrying Daniel Whitmore, and when he opened his own law practice in Raleigh, I became the silent structure behind it. But the real center of my world wasn't the firm. It was my daughter, Lily. 4 years old. Soft curls. Sticky hands. The kind of laugh that made even the worst days dissolve. Every decision I made, every late night balancing client invoices, every early morning packing Daniel's files, was about her future. Security. Stability. A life without fear. Daniel used to squeeze my hand at night and whisper, "We're building something solid." And I believed him. Our house wasn't extravagant, but it felt permanent. The firm was growing. Clients trusted him. On paper, we were thriving, $600,000 a year in revenue, expanding caseload, new office lease signed. But numbers don't always tell the truth. Some nights, I'd wake up and hear Daniel pacing downstairs. The glow of his laptop lighting up the kitchen. His face tight. Focused. I'd ask if he was okay. "Just business," he'd say. "Go back to sleep." I trusted him. I trusted that what we had was secure. I didn't know he was already preparing for a storm I couldn't see. And I definitely didn't know that the person who would try to tear it all apart wasn't a stranger. It was family. If Daniel was the face of the firm, Margaret Whitmore was the shadow behind it. My mother-in-law built her reputation the way she built her chain of laundromats, methodical, aggressive, and obsessed with control. She loved telling anyone who would listen that Daniel's success existed because of her $185,000 investment years ago. She never called it a loan. She called it proof that without her, we were nothing. At family dinners, she would raise her glass and say, "To smart mothers who know when to step in." Her eyes would land on me every time. I was the former secretary who married up. The quiet one. The girl who should feel grateful. She corrected how I set the table in my own house. Questioned how I dressed Lily. Once, in front of clients at a holiday party, she laughed and said, "Elena's good with paperwork." Real decisions? That's Daniel's department. I smiled. Because I had learned something early about Margaret. She underestimated people on purpose. It made her feel taller. And she truly believed that one day, if she ever wanted to, she could take back what she thought was hers. What she didn't know was that Daniel had stopped seeing her money as power. He had started seeing it as a liability. And I was the only one who noticed the shift. The first real fracture didn't happen at the funeral. It happened months earlier, at a Sunday dinner Margaret insisted on hosting. Daniel had just signed a commercial lease expansion. On paper, revenue was climbing, $620,000 that year. Margaret was glowing, telling her friends her son was becoming a real empire. Then she turned to me and asked, "Sweet as syrup, and what exactly do you contribute these days, Elena? Besides, moral support?" The table laughed lightly. Polite. Harmless. But Daniel didn't. He looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "She keeps this place from collapsing." Margaret's smile thinned. "Of course," she replied. "But ownership is different from assistance." Ownership. The word lingered. On the drive home, Daniel was quiet. Too quiet. His fingers gripped the steering wheel harder than usual. "She still thinks she owns a piece of me," he finally said. I told him it didn't matter. That we were fine. But later that night, I found him reviewing old loan documents. The $185,000 agreement. Terms. Clauses. That was the first time I realized Margaret wasn't just proud. She was waiting. And Daniel was starting to prepare for something he hadn't told me about yet. I had thought I'd seen her worst. I was wrong. It was a Friday afternoon when Margaret appeared at the firm unannounced. The receptionist called me, voice tight, whispering, "She's here, asking for Daniel." I walked into the lobby, heart calm but fists clenched. Margaret's gaze swept over the office as if she owned the place. She smiled at clients who were mid-consultation, pretending she was welcome. "You've been running things well, Elena," she said, slow, deliberate. "But let's face it, a widow can only manage so much." I forced a polite smile. I reminded myself that anger is noise. Silence is power. Then she leaned close, almost conspiratorial. "I just hope you're not spending all his money on hobbies." A client laughed nervously. My cheeks burned, not from embarrassment, but from the realization everyone here believed her. The very people I had worked so hard to impress, to protect, were watching me shrink. I didn't say a word. I let her speak. Let her walk through my office like a queen inspecting peasants. Because I remembered something Daniel once whispered when she belittled me, "Never let her know you see the pieces she's moving. She'll play herself." I nodded to myself, almost imperceptibly, and returned to my desk. The seed of patience had been planted. The storm wasn't yet here, but I could feel it gathering, and I was already waiting. The funeral had barely ended when reality hit me harder than grief ever could. 11 days after Daniel's passing, Margaret appeared at my door. She wasn't mourning. She was calculating. "I want everything," she said, her voice crisp and unapologetic. "The house. The firm. The accounts. Every cent your husband left behind." I froze for a fraction of a second. Lily sat on the floor, coloring quietly. Margaret didn't even glance at her. "I didn't sign up to raise someone else's child," she added. My stomach twisted. The home I had built, the life we had shared, all hanging by the thread of her ego. Then came the subtle attacks. Calls from clients she intimidated. Letters threatening lawsuits over the $185,000 alone. She demoted staff, including the woman who had managed our accounts flawlessly for years. She moved her unemployed son into my house, like she was already in control. The empire she imagined she was inheriting, a $600,000 law firm, was, in her mind, already hers. And for the first time, I understood something crucial: no one would step in for me. Not the lawyers, not the neighbors. Not even the friends I thought I could rely on. I had lost control, or at least, that's what she believed. And that belief would be her greatest weakness. The nights after Margaret moved in were the hardest. Lily cried for her father, unaware that the woman who claimed to own everything now ruled our home. The walls echoed with tension. My friends called, worried, urging me to fight in court immediately. My mother's voice trembled over the phone, "You can't let her walk all over you, Elena. Do something." But I didn't react. Not visibly. Not yet. I locked myself in my thoughts, replaying every interaction, every subtle jab, every smirk Margaret had thrown my way over the years. She thrived on chaos, on making people feel small. And she believed that grief had left me powerless. I cried alone, but only for a moment. Then I focused on Lily's laughter, the sound that reminded me why I had to endure this storm. I reminded myself, patience isn't weakness. It's preparation. The world thought I was collapsing. They thought I was defeated. But in the quiet of my own mind, I began to strategize. Every conversation she had, every move she made, I observed. Every claim she filed, every threat she made, I catalogued. I was no longer a victim. I was a student of her arrogance. And somewhere deep down, I made a decision: I wouldn't just survive. I would win. The question was, how do you trap someone who believes she already owns the game? Anger surged through me more times than I could count. The urge to scream, to throw papers, to confront Margaret in front of everyone was almost unbearable. But I remembered something Daniel always said: revenge is loud. Strategy is silent. I made a choice: I would stop reacting. I would stop pleading. I would stop proving myself to someone who never valued me. Instead, I would observe. I would listen. I would calculate. Every night, I went through the firm's files she believed she had inherited. Every phone call she made. Every client she intimidated. I took notes. Patterns emerged: impatience, overconfidence, blind belief that her son's empire was limitless. I enlisted allies quietly. My mother kept tabs on her moves. My best friend offered advice, emotional support, and sometimes a reality check when I felt fear creeping in. And my daughter, innocent, unaware, was my anchor. Every plan I would make, every silent move, had to protect her first. I began to see the cracks in Margaret's self-assuredness. The arrogance that made her believe she could steamroll me, it was also her weakness. The world outside thought I was passive. They thought I was broken. But I was building a map. A blueprint. A plan where, one day, the person who had tried to take everything would realize she had taken nothing that mattered. And I would wait. Margaret seemed unstoppable. Every day, she strutted through my house and the firm as if she had been born to rule. Clients canceled meetings. The accountant she trusted for years was gone. The office felt hollow. Even my mother fretted that I'd waited too long, that my silence would be my undoing. I watched it all, quietly. Her satisfaction was intoxicating to her, and she wore it like armor. She mocked my caution, dismissed my questions, and treated Lily's presence like a minor inconvenience. Her son, Tyler, bounced around our living room, oblivious, repeating everything she said as if it were gospel. On the surface, she had won. Every outsider would have agreed. She had the papers, the keys, the illusion of power. But inside, I noticed the small things she didn't see: the inconsistent bookkeeping, the unpaid invoices piling up, the quiet notes Daniel had left me detailing expenses she assumed didn't exist. I studied her patterns, how she overestimated her authority, underestimated resistance, and always acted first without checking the facts. Her confidence was blinding. My silence was deliberate. I didn't panic. I didn't interfere yet. I simply waited. Because patience, I realized, could make her feel powerful, while I quietly prepared the moment when that power would collapse. And that moment was coming sooner than she imagined. Margaret believed she knew the terrain, but she was walking blind. I spent hours reviewing every detail she overlooked. The firm's finances weren't as robust as she thought. Daniel had left notes, carefully, secretly, documenting unpaid taxes, lingering debts, and pending settlements she assumed didn't exist. Every success she bragged about was built on fragile footing. I compiled spreadsheets she would never check, memorized client lists, and traced every contract that carried hidden obligations. I watched her psychology as closely as her finances. She craved control but hated confrontation. She acted quickly, spoke loudly, and assumed that speed equaled dominance. If I could create the illusion of surrender while steering her toward critical mistakes, she wouldn't even see it coming. Even Tyler, her son, was predictable. Naive, eager to please, and completely loyal to his mother's authority. He became an unwitting piece in a much larger puzzle. I also began practicing the art of silence in public. Nods instead of words, calm smiles instead of arguments. Every interaction was a test, an opportunity to gauge her reactions, expose her overconfidence, and gather proof she didn't even realize I had. The key truth became clear: her greatest weapon was also her greatest weakness. She believed she had already won. And when someone thinks victory is theirs, they leave doors wide open. I just had to wait for the right one. I knew confrontation would destroy my plan. Instead, I chose precision. I drafted an offer no one expected, everything she demanded: a house, firm, accounts, on paper, signed and ready. All of it. Every asset she thought she had one. But there was one condition she couldn't ignore: full custody of Lily, no visitation, and a complete legal release. When I presented the agreement, Margaret laughed. Finally seeing sense, she said, thinking she had trapped me. Her lawyer scanned the documents, nodded, and prepared to celebrate what he believed was a total victory. I smiled quietly. "Sign here," I said. She did. Confidently. Eagerly. Blindly. Even as the pen scratched across the paper, I knew she had fallen exactly where I wanted. She didn't read the fine details. She never paused to question what else might be hidden in the clauses, because arrogance convinced her she didn't need to. Her lawyer hesitated when he got to a paragraph, but Margaret waved him off. She didn't want to hear it. She wanted the illusion of absolute power, and she was too excited to pause. I handed her the papers. She took them. And as the ink dried, I felt something I hadn't in months: calm. Because the game wasn't over. It had just begun, and she didn't even know she was already losing. Margaret woke the next morning believing she was untouchable. She strutted through the firm, issuing orders, checking accounts, calling clients, everything she thought made her invincible. But reality hit silently. The first red flags appeared: the accountant's files she had dismissed revealed unpaid taxes. Invoices for cases she assumed were complete were still outstanding. Vendors she ignored were calling repeatedly, demanding payments. Every asset she had claimed was tied to obligations she hadn't anticipated. Her confidence faltered. Not visibly, she refused to show doubt, but I could see it in her quick glances at her son, Tyler, who nervously repeated her instructions without fully understanding them. She began signing checks blindly, assuming that what she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. Every action created small fractures in her empire. And she still believed she had absolute control. Meanwhile, I watched quietly, keeping Lily close, reviewing Daniel's secret notes, and recalculating every number. I didn't have to interfere yet. She was digging her own pit, and her arrogance ensured she wouldn't notice until it was too late. Her first mistake wasn't what she did, it was what she thought she knew. And as she tightened her grip, I realized the final move had to be perfect. Because one wrong step from me, or one right step from her, could ruin everything. I knew the plan would demand a cost. Not money, not status, but something far more personal. To secure Lily's future, to finally trap Margaret in her own arrogance, I had to appear completely compliant. I had to surrender everything publicly: the house, the firm, the accounts, the illusion of control. It hurt. My chest tightened every time I handed over another key, signed another document, let her see me defeated. Friends called, begging me to fight. My mother's voice trembled over the phone: "Are you sure about this?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked at Lily and made the choice. Every small fear, every bitter thought about losing what Daniel and I built, melted away. This was temporary. The surrender was strategic. I also had to give Margaret space, let her taste her supposed victory fully. Every confident smile, every order barked at staff, every careless assumption would feed the trap I had laid. In private, I calculated every risk. My eyes scanned Daniel's files again, tracing debts, pending settlements, and hidden liabilities. The sacrifice wasn't losing to her, it was letting her believe she had already won. I whispered to myself in the quiet of our empty living room, patience is the weapon she never saw coming. The world thought I had lost. But the real game, the one that would undo her, had only just begun. Margaret was intoxicated by her own triumph. She signed contracts, authorized payments, and even bragged to clients that she had rescued the firm. Tyler followed her like a shadow, repeating her confidence as if it were gospel. But every step she took had already been calculated. The house she claimed came with a massive mortgage she hadn't noticed. The firm's cash flow was tied up in taxes, pending settlements, and vendor bills she couldn't ignore. Every account she touched had hidden obligations Daniel had secretly recorded. Her lawyer finally raised an eyebrow at the documents I had signed over. But Margaret waved him off, laughing, "It's all mine. Don't ruin my fun with audits." I watched silently from the background, Lily playing at my feet. Every misstep she made, every assumption of security, strengthened the web I had spun. By the time she realized the depth of the liabilities, unpaid IRS taxes, pending settlements, overdraft notices, her confidence began to crumble. Tyler panicked, unsure how to respond. Margaret's empire, the one she believed unshakable, was collapsing under its own weight. And I hadn't lifted a finger. Because true power doesn't shout. It waits. It watches. And in the end, it lets arrogance destroy itself. Margaret had taken everything, except what mattered most. It all unraveled in the quietest way possible. Margaret discovered the IRS notices first. Then the pending settlements Daniel had documented months before his death. Vendors began calling incessantly. Tyler, her shield and pawn, panicked as he realized he had co-signed accounts he didn't understand. Her phone calls grew frantic. Meetings she had scheduled to take control now became arguments with creditors and lawyers. Every confident order she had barked out earlier turned into panic-driven negotiation. She stormed into the office, waving contracts, demanding answers, blaming Tyler, threatening lawsuits. But no one could fix what she had ignored. Every number, every liability, every hidden debt she had dismissed as irrelevant hit her like a hammer. Her lawyer, the same one who had celebrated her victory, went pale reading the documents I had left her. He looked at Margaret as if seeing her for the first time, not the confident queen she pretended to be, but a woman trapped by her own arrogance. And I stood in the doorway, calm, holding Lily's hand. "You wanted everything," I said softly. "Except her." Her face twisted as realization struck. Every move she had made, every assumption of power, it had been mine to guide. And she had walked exactly where I wanted her. Margaret called me 2 weeks later. Her voice was unsteady, trembling with frustration, disbelief, and the first taste of true loss. I'm losing everything," she whispered. I smiled calmly, rocking Lily gently. "You said you wanted everything, except my daughter. I just gave you exactly that." There was silence on the line. I could hear Tyler fuming in the background, his mother's empire crumbling around him. Every laundromat she had bragged about, every office she had claimed, every dollar she thought she was taking, she was now selling her own assets to cover debts she had ignored. Vendors called. IRS notices piled up. Tenants demanded payments. The house she thought she owned was tied to liabilities she had never calculated. Meanwhile, I had already claimed what Daniel had prepared for me. $875,000 from life insurance. $210,000 from retirement accounts. Money completely untouchable, completely mine. I moved into a modest apartment, paid rent easily, and enrolled in paralegal courses to build my own future. No debts. No controlling mother-in-law. Just Lily and me. I watched her world implode from a distance, and felt no triumph in cruelty, only the satisfaction of justice executed quietly, patiently, and flawlessly. Daniel's last words echoed in my mind, "Don't let her take what matters. She can have the rest." I had followed them to the letter. And for the first time in months, I felt free. The woman who tried to destroy me lost everything. And I gained everything that truly mattered. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit like to show you love suspense done right. Comment below and tell me, have you ever been underestimated or pushed to the edge like Elena? I want to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story where patience and strategy beat arrogance every single time.